Good evening, this is the Oscar expert here, and I recently decided to watch the Apes Trilogy. You know, with Matt Reeves and the Batman coming out, I got a little curious to revisit what was one of the more creative uses of intellectual property that we've seen in the past decade. I think it reminds us that there's nothing really wrong with a reboot or a remake, so long as it's handled with care. And now Matt Reeves is a filmmaker where whenever they helm anything, whether it's a reboot or a remake, we get excited about it. I mean, Matt Reeves directed the worst kind of remake, the American remake of the European hit that just came out. And his version was not as good as Let the Right One In, but it was surprisingly not embarrassing. And in Hollywood these days, it seems like original ideas often need to be jammed into existing IP in order to get made, which is depressing, but at least there are examples like this of people who know how to do that well. Props to the Apes Trilogy screenwriters, Amanda Silver and Rick Jaffa, who did not pitch a straightforward reboot of the source material like Tim Burton's version in 2001. So let's get into my thoughts on the individual films. Rise of the Planet of the Apes was directed by Rupert Wyatt, and I think it's a pretty solid start to the trilogy. It does feature a pretty forgettable James Franco performance, which I think is maybe the biggest issue with it. Not James Franco necessarily, but just that this character is a little weak. He's definitely serviceable to the story, but for someone who is basically a dual protagonist who starts out as the main character, they really refuse to go above and beyond with him. Instead, the focus shifts a lot towards Caesar. But really, I think this character could have been much more interesting if the director took their time with some of the more emotional moments. There's the part where James Franco finds out that he actually did cure his dad's Alzheimer's, and his dad's just like, I'm feeling better. And he's like, oh, all right, nice. There's a moment where his dad dies, and he's just sitting on the bed looking at him like, yeah, he did die. If Matt Reeves directed this, those moments would have been milked. There would have been tears. And overall, this movie is not really very special visually. There are some memorable shots. But really, this film gets more interesting as we dive more into Caesar, as I said, and he starts to question where he belongs in the world and where his allegiances lie. And his story actually feels pretty grounded and realistic. It's a story of somebody who's leaving their sheltered life and is exposed to an uncomfortable reality, which is how his kind are treated in the world that he lives in. And he becomes kind of a leader, and it starts the whole thing of Caesar becoming a sort of messiah, leading the apes to the eventual promised land. Also, what makes the movie kind of feel real is that monkeys do get experimented on like this. It's like, yeah, if they got smarter, they would do this probably. If cows got smarter, they would do it. If pigs got smarter, they would do it. It would take a lot for chickens to do it, but if they were smart enough, watch the fuck out. But one of the best things about this film, and all the films in general, is the use of visual effects, because they're all in service of the story and the characters and the emotion. I mean, after seeing this movie, people wearing monkey makeup suits does not cut it. The trilogy gave us the most impressive motion capture performance, I think, any of us have ever seen with Andy Serkis's performance as Caesar. And the way that the performance integrates with what the visual effects artists are doing and how they have to complement Andy Serkis's performance, there's a real art to that. It's using that studio dollar to push the boundaries of our empathy, where it lies more with the creature than it does with the humans at times. I like that we're getting a story where we're rooting for the monkeys, even though in real life we would probably be one of the people sitting watching at home, watching them attack the San Francisco Bridge and saying, shoot those monkeys, get them, kill them! And the final battle on the bridge is a really satisfying action sequence. I do wish this moment between James Franco and Caesar hit harder though, like in the way that this moment does. But what's also nice about this film is how open-ended it is in setting up the next one. We have Caesar choosing that he belongs with his people and that they will head to the woods. What on earth could happen next? Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is, in my opinion, one of the best, if not the best, blockbuster franchise film of the 2010s. The opening shot alone is a stronger statement of style than the entire film of Rise of the Planet of the Apes. This is what happens when you recruit a director onto a project who knows how to utilize every branch of craft to enhance storytelling. The murky, dripping, wet green haze of the forest gives the film a really strong sense of atmosphere. Every shot and every edit feels so much more purposeful and powerful. The wides hit harder, the close-ups are more intense. The score from Michael Giacchino has a stronger identity, and Matt Reeves loves to milk these more emotional moments. His film simmers and makes sure that every beat of the story feels purposeful. Or even that moment where Gary Oldman plugs in the iPad and sees his children's face for the first time in years. You know, there's a few things you could say that the movie's about, but for me, through and through, it is about tribalism. It's about two groups who want the same things. They want family, security, a way to provide a better future, and two groups who can't lend each other the same empathy that they would to those in their in-group. And because of the mistrust rooted in the perception that the other side is the other, they cannot get these good things that they want, because the actions of those who want to stoke the flames and instill fear is always going to be more powerful than those who are striving for peace. And that tragedy really resonates because we absolutely live in that world. It's unfortunately really easy to convince people that they are in danger and that they need to be fearful and angry and that empathy is a sign of weakness. And I love how every character is sympathetic. Even Koba, who we can understand because the only history that he's ever had with human beings is being experimented on and being tortured in a lab. So we almost can't blame him when he starts to become suspicious that these human beings are going to harm his tribe again. And Gary Oldman, who says villain shit like, "They're animals!" We really understand that he's fighting for his family that he lost. And it's unfortunately rare that we get blockbusters where we really understand both sides of a conflict. And we're rooting for them to achieve peace instead. Very much unlike a couple characters in Rise like Malfoy, who's like, "Dumb monkeys! Stupid apes!" And then David Oyelowo, who's like, "This better make me money. I definitely like having my money." It's a surprisingly mature and political film. And I love that it dares to be really dark and to end on a tragic note, where the last line is, "I thought we had a chance." Just devastating. The cinematography is just delicious. The action is really carefully done, beautifully shot. I mean, that tank shot where we're just mounted on the tank as it's spinning around just captures the tragic chaos of the whole situation. And even during these moments of action where we're getting all these explosions and gunfire, it's sad because we think, damn, if only they understood each other, things would have worked out better. And that's very rare for an action film. And what a brilliant final shot with Caesar's eyes, really showing how that character has been weathered throughout the film, showing how he feels the world is something scary and that he doesn't understand that he no longer has control of. Whereas in the beginning, he's this confident leader who leads his tribe to yet another successful hunt. In this one, he's completely lost his grip. And there's a powerful arc here for Caesar too. You know, as much as he kind of comes across as the more level-headed and agreeable person in the film, along with Jason Clarke, he does break his own rule, ape not to kill ape. It's more about evaluating people based on their individuality. I think it's a near perfect film, and we'd be ever so lucky to get more blockbusters like it. And it works really well as a standalone movie. And now, we're gonna talk about War for the Planet of the Apes. This is where my opinion becomes quite controversial. I do not think that War lives up to Dawn at all. I thought this in 2017 when I walked out of the theater and I was like, what was that? And then I watch it again. You know, I watch all the films back to back just now. And I still think, what? What were we doing here? What was the point of all this? Yes, this one has a lot of the strengths that Dawn did visually. You know, also being helmed by Matt Reeves. It is a very visually impressive film. The score from Michael Giacchino, once again, very good. I don't know if I like it as much visually because I did feel like the sense of atmosphere was stronger in the second film and the visual effects are better than ever. Watching the films back to back, you can easily see a progression in the visual effects even though they're 3 years apart. And in this last one, the ape visual effects are nearly flawless. Here's what I like in its ambitions. I like that it's trying to look at Caesar's flaws. That's the perfect direction for the third installment to go into. Caesar examining himself, his weaknesses, how he is susceptible to the same kind of bloodthirst that he was trying to put an end to, because this time it's affected him personally, and his wife and his son, are killed by Woody Harrelson. The ambition of the other apes in this one is to finally find that promised land where they can live at peace and be undisturbed by human conflict. So that's great. You know, it sounds like the flaws that Caesar is facing are going to impede the group goal of trying to find that promised land. But not really. I don't think the movie lets him fall off the deep end enough. The revenge plot ends up just being the kind of generic, like, my son, my wife were killed. I will have my revenge. This is a stagnant conflict that's barely touched on until the end when you do get that moment where he's about to kill the colonel. And then he decides not to because his revenge seems insignificant and silly in that moment, especially when he's watching the colonel's brain deteriorate. And then he just decides not to kill him because that's usually what happens in revenge movies. And then he goes and he saves the other apes. And that's the whole conflict. That's the entire revenge conflict in the movie. There is one part where the Colonel says something like, "If you had killed me like you came here to do, don't you see how we would have come after your people and that would have negatively affected your group?" And Caesar's like, I didn't really think about that. Now what if we got a movie where that actually happened? And Caesar's blind revenge and his bloodthirst affect the tribe. Most of the film is sidetracked with little pointless things like this introduction of the little girl. Now, I sort of like the idea of this girl's inclusion because the first two films were about, how much humans can integrate with apes and what their relationship can be. But this little girl is just a robot. When we meet her, she does not cry in seeing her dead dad on the ground. And the movie just has her stand there and be stupid and be like, "My dad dead? I join the apes now? I ride with new apes away from my home and I don't care and I don't cry about it?" And then when the ape dies like a day later, she cries about the ape that she just met. Doesn't shed a tear for her dad. And it really seems like it's only constructed so that we can have this like nice little moment, like the ape giving her the flower and then her giving her the flower back to the ape 5 seconds later when he randomly dies. I think this little girl was just there because the screenwriters were like, well, when we introduce a little girl into the story, we can have some of those little emotional moments because she represents innocence, but she doesn't have anything interesting going on. The other side character that we kind of scoop up along the way is Dumb Ape. The ape doesn't really serve a purpose outside of helping the characters get to where they need to go. A lot of it just seems like a distraction to avoid from dealing with Caesar's underdeveloped internal conflict. The only character that the movie tries to get to confront Caesar on a deeper level is the Colonel, but it just felt like weak writing that this character has like a whole 15-minute exposition monologue just explaining his backstory in a cliche way that every villain with like a philosophical motive would do. And unfortunately, the entire backstory is kind of irrelevant. His backstory is that the pandemic disease has mutated and is causing human beings to devolve. And then apes will eventually overtake the humans and use them as their cattle, as he says. The real purpose of this is actually just to tie this movie into the source material of Planet of the Apes, because that's kind of like setting up the idea that this planet will become the Planet of the Apes, where the apes are actually enslaving the humans. But this trilogy was doing so well just doing its own thing. And this tie-in doesn't feel like it supports any ideas that were already brewing in the story. Like, what do we care about what is going on with humans devolving? I mean, even in the end of the movie, the only thing we care about is the apes and their fate. Some of the moments where Caesar is trying to stand up in the concentration camp are good. The escape plot is fine. The action towards the end is decent, but then the entire conflict ends with one huge, just mega explosion that very conveniently wipes out everything that needs to be wiped out. Then the US Army comes in. Oh my God, there's an entire other horde of troops who will kill these apes. And then the world's most convenient avalanche happens right then. I understand maybe this avalanche happened because of the explosion, okay, but still, this avalanche instantly kills everybody who needs to die, and it saves all the apes. The most convenient avalanche of all time. And then at the end of the movie, the apes get exactly the thing that they wanted from the beginning of the trilogy, which is a nice moment. And Caesar's looking upon what he has created, and we're all thinking, wow, Caesar really is so great. But of course, at the end of the movie, Caesar dies because when the trilogy's over, you gotta kill the main character and make it a real emotional moment. I saw some comments on YouTube, people being like, but Caesar's downfall, the thing that killed him, was his own like selfishness or something. It's like, no, it's not. Like, he got shot with an arrow by a guy while he was trying to save everybody. I don't know what the central conflict in War for the Planet of the Apes is. And I understand that a lot of people love this movie, and I don't want to take that away from anybody. I'm just trying to get my thoughts out there. But overall, I still have a lot of respect for the trilogy, what it did with motion capture, Andy Serkis's performance. I also like that it just settles for being 3 films. And hey, if we got Dawn of the Planet of the Apes out of this trilogy, that makes the whole thing more than worth it. And those are my thoughts on the Planet of the Apes trilogy. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Will you succumb to apes?